Hi, welcome back to X-Raced, where knowledge meets inspiration in the intricate dance of industry evolution. I'm back with a guest to explore how real businesses work, grow, and stay relevant in a world that doesn't slow down. We'll talk about something that sounds simple, but quietly drives everything else: clarity. Let's admit it, most business problems don't start with bad ideas. They start with confusion about what the business is actually there to do. Our guest understands clarity at scale, how strong systems, values, and people come together to build sustainable organizations. With over 4 decades of experience helping organizations lift performance, embed responsibility, and build sustainable capability, he's been at the forefront of linking standards, values, and people long before it was fashionable. We'll be joined once again by the leader of a globally recognized ISO certified education and training provider, the managing director and CEO of ACI Global and e-Quip, Ian Erskine. Hi, Ian. Beautiful morning.
And good morning to you, Miles, and good afternoon and good evening to people in other places of the world. And yes, it's lovely to be back again. And I hope everyone had a wonderful weekend, enjoying time with their families and loved ones, and preparing themselves for the week forward. And yes, so it's lovely to be back again discussing a very interesting topic. And someone mentioned to me when I said that I'd be discussing this, and they said, "Oh, that's just a boring, mundane topic, Ian." And I said, "Well, perhaps you should listen to this episode because certainly not boring and not mundane."
Let's see. It's a challenge. Good challenge. But yeah, I agree. And before we go to our topic, I would like to just mark this 67th X-Raced episode of yours. I would like to congratulate you for the very good news that you received just last week. And so today, our main focus is on business scope and process, but we're keeping it practical, what it really means for businesses, for people, and performance. When businesses hear scope, it can sound abstract or maybe overly technical, but in reality, it defines what a business actually does. So, in simple terms, Ian, why is getting clarity on business scope such a critical starting point for organizations, especially before they even think about systems, compliance, or improvement?
Well, let me just quickly step back on your good news about my
Thank
good
you.
news.
Yes.
And I'm always happy to share this with everyone. A lot of people that know me quite well would know what the good news is. The good news is that I've now been deemed cancer-free for the fifth year. So that's the great news. And yes, so being very positive, and I know there's lots of people out there that are dealing with cancer, and the good news is that you can beat it, but you must share the news with your family and your loved ones and others because they can give you that extra strength to go on that journey of recovery.
Well said.
Yeah. Now, to
Thank
answer
you
your
for sharing
question,
that.
now, I guess clarity in a nutshell is people. This is the starting point, which has to be the first and foremost about the whole thing. And I heard you mention that word, and it's so simple because it is people. People really matter. Now, this is where we lead to values and principles. Firstly, do your values align with your country's values and principles?
Mhm.
And then this ultimately involves your stakeholders, which are people and others, right? But foremost, it's people, which brings me back to a better understanding of the relationships which are formed for the benefit of both parties.
Mhm.
It's a telling point. Without people, do you really have a business? And the answer to that is no. So that is why it is so important to actually go back to the very start. And, even for startups,
Mhm.
businesses must put that emphasis on getting the right people. And
Mhm.
and I think this is something that possibly we will discuss at another episode in reference to the employment questions, the questions you should be asking or your employment agent should be asking on your behalf are in reference to who are you going to get into your organisation? What are their values and principles? Who
Yeah.
do they agree with their country's principles and values?
Mm-hmm.
Because if they don't, if they're loggerheads number one with their country's principles and values, there's obviously an issue there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, I think that's a very telling point.
Yeah. And, that's very basic, I think. If you don't know what game you're playing, every decision feels harder than it needs to be. So, once an organization clearly defines its scope, people, its real activities and goals, like ACI Global's focus on education and training, how does that clarity shape the way processes are designed and managed day to day rather than just sitting in a manual or a policy document?
Yes, this is a very interesting one, and quite often this comes across when I do my audits. And I guess a red flag for me is when I walk into the quality manager's or the managing director's office, and lined all around the wall is a line of manual after manual after manual after manual,
Mhm.
and that's where I sort of okay. So I start this off by basically getting people to understand what a process is, right?
Mhm.
Now, the process basically is what you actually do, okay? And for argument's sake, it's it's the output. For us, it's education of people,
Mhm.
right? Now, a procedure, which is different to the process, the procedure is how that actually is performed. Okay, so this
Mhm.
is where, for argument's sake, ACI Global, we look at our learners' needs. Before you can do any of their education, right? They may come to us and say, yes, we want to do the lead auditors program, or you want to be a senior manager. At the very start, if you don't go back and determine what their existing qualifications are, what their actual needs are, and you can only determine that by going back to see what they have in place,
Mhm.
you lose point. Okay.
Right.
And again, this is where you get your clarity in reference to your scope of your business.
Mhm.
And so, yes, so what we've done, we've ensured that we identify what the business is all about. As I said, people.
Mhm.
And this is critical. Lots of people, when they look at the scope of their business, particularly when we talk about certification reference, ISO standards, for example, they lose sight of the fact that the standards are not there to run their business.
Mhm.
A lot of people, and even certification bodies, and even a lot of auditors come to me and say, oh, it's a compliance standard. They're all compliance standards. They are not compliance standards. Basically, all the standards are non-mandatory. They are guidance only.
Mhm.
And this is where I emphasize, and this is where you get the value add for a business, is the business themselves want to go ahead with ISO certification. So that way they implement the standards as guidance. It
Mhm.
guides them. But again, it goes back to the difference between conformity and compliance. Conformity is whereby you want to conform. Compliance basically is you don't have any option but to comply. That is
Yeah.
law, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And generally, the best thing is, and the involvement of people in reference to the business scope is people want to conform, they want to be high achievers. And that's where you get a real sustainable business process operating so that a business can achieve its scope.
Right. So guidance that adds value to the organization. Mhm.
Yes, and again, this is one of the questions I always pose to the managing directors and the people of the organisations that I deal with, and the challenge I give them is, you have to tell me, you have to be upfront, bold enough to say, well, in actual fact, Ian, you're not adding any value to our business. And I simply say, well, if that's the case, I'm glad you're honest. There's no
Mm-hmm.
point in me coming back. You have to be able to add value. And again, this becomes some sort of a conflicting argument because often you will hear people say, oh, auditors can't go in and dictate or can't go in and say anything positive about the organisation because that tends to give a direction that the auditor is consulting to the company, which is a
Mm-hmm.
conflict of interest, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I always go back and say, now hold on a minute. An
Yeah.
auditor has to be able to look at an issue, right? Now, for argument's sake, it could be with the scope of the business. The scope of the business may well be missing a major part of their business where they're going to, if it's highlighted,
Mm-hmm.
going to achieve adding value and adding profitability to the business, right? So that's where you say, well, I suggest that you have a look at your scope of your business because you are missing out on promoting a major part of your business.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a major part of helping your people achieve ongoing success. And if your people can achieve ongoing success, that way that is passed on to the service you provide.
Yeah.
And that way, then that is added back into the business in profitability and
Mm-hmm.
for the ability of that business to continue to grow, prosper, and achieve sustained success. And
Mm-hmm.
that's critical.
Yes, it's a domino effect. It's really essential to have those processes that actually guide behavior and the people, not just something that leaves on a shelf or gets pulled out for audits. And aside from
Yes.
referencing ISO standards, your manual also referred to industry regulations, statutory requirements, and national principles and values. How important is it, Ian, for organizations to align their processes not only with standards but also with the legal and cultural expectations of the country in which they operate?
Well, every country and organization within the world deals within certain parameters.
Mhm.
Now, those parameters always come back to people, and it ultimately comes back to primary duty of care. Okay. And following on from primary duty of care, we have the rule of law. Okay. Now, this is where the high level of your activities come in, and we look at saying, well, okay, so if you're going to join our organisation, can you demonstrate to us your understanding of primary duty of care? And
Mhm.
for argument's sake, within an industry, for argument's sake, if that's national heavy vehicles and you're wanting to employ a driver, okay, one of the things that you would want to ensure is that that driver is acutely aware of his responsibility of managing his own fatigue.
Mhm.
And to give you an example, we all have it. We all have situations where we have a terrible night and you wake up in the morning and say, oh God, I just wish I could go back to sleep.
Yeah.
This is where drivers particularly have to make that decision. Well, I've got to go to work because if I don't go to work, I'm not going to go to get the money. But if I go to work, I may be an incident happening on the road, which it may
Mhm.
put myself at risk, but others.
Mhm.
That's where the driver primary duty of care comes in, and he has to say, pops on his phone, sends a text to his managing director or senior manager, and just say, look, I've had a terrible night. I may have come down with the flu or something like that. I can't come to work today. That is not only acceptable,
Yeah.
that actually, in fact, is required by law. That's your primary duty of care.
Mhm.
Okay. So this is where, again, if we don't get the people part of the process right, and again, I'll mention this right at the end, it's really quite simple. Okay. People matter. People focus in everything we do. And we'll address this towards the end. But if we don't get that right, your whole business will fall down. Okay, because you will have an issue where someone feels completely obligated and it overrides that primary duty of care. So they
Mhm.
get in their motor vehicle, And again, I've had this situation where I've been driving to do an audit. I pulled up at a set of traffic lights and a small vehicle had pulled up in front of me, and I looked to my right, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he was sort of nodding backwards and forwards over his steering wheel. And I thought, my God, this is an accident waiting to happen.
Right.
Lights turned green. And I think it was my instinct. My brain told me hit the horn. So I hit the horn, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I looked immediately to my right, and he immediately sat up and accelerated with myself, right? Now I accelerated a little bit faster, pulled in front of him where he pulled across to the side, and I gradually moved across, and he pulled off on the side of the road with me in front of him, right? I quickly got out of my car and I went to him, and he looked at me and he said, "Oh, look, I do it. Thank you so much for stopping me. I'm so tired." And he said, "I've got to get to work." And I said, "No, get on your phone now, ring them," and said, "Look, I'm not driving any further because I am an accident waiting to happen." And I said, "Look, I'll sit and wait." I waited 15 minutes, and one someone from his work came, and they thanked me, and they hopped in the truck and drove him to work, right? And then he went back home. But these are the situations that happen if we breach our own primary duty of care, right? And again, this is critical to the scope of the business, critical to people.
Yeah, I agree. And it prevents worse things or situations from happening, as you said. And what one thinks as a small mistake could turn into a massive life-changing problems. That's the core. I think that's a pretty good point, Ian, because what works on paper doesn't always work in practice if it ignores the whole context. And processes don't run themselves, people do. How does clearly defining scope and process help employees better understand their roles, responsibilities, and decision making, especially in organizations trying to build consistency, confidence, and of course, accountability?
And accountability, and it works across all business, because if
Uh-huh.
people aren't achieving their very best at delivering their tasks, the business ultimately won't be able to deliver the service that people require, which ultimately then turns out that the business performance suffers, right? So you take it back to people, right?
Mhm.
And you ensure that every step of the process that a person has from the very start of the morning. And this is what I say. And I was actually saying this to someone at breakfast this morning, where you need to be able to go to bed and have a predetermined plan in place to get up in the morning to complete certain tasks as you go. And it can be you have processes in place, you know exactly what you want to achieve for that day.
Mhm.
This ultimately comes up when I discuss people how they're doing their jobs and so forth. And I ask them, so okay, so when you leave work, do you leave work with a clear desk, or do you leave work, your desk is overloaded, you've got phone calls to make? And the classic case is when I check people's email boxes, they have hundreds and hundreds of emails that they haven't even answered yet. And I say to them, okay, so you're going to go to bed tonight, and you're going to say to yourself, "Oh God, how much work I've got to do in the morning, all those emails, all this to do and all this to do." You, number one, you won't go to bed in the right frame of mind. Number two, ultimately, you don't have a good night because your brain is trying to churn over. Okay, I've got to answer these emails. Okay, I've got to ring Joe in reference to this. Oh, I've got to make an appointment and things like this. You number one, then you end up starting the day in a bad frame of mind. How good is it when you can actually go to bed? You can say, yes, I've got this to do, this to do, this to do. And then basically all I've got to do then is handle the inquiries as they come in, right? So you get out of bed, you bounce out of bed, you make your bed, have your breakfast, go to work enthused, right? Otherwise, the opposite, you don't do that, and your business performance for you achieving your tasks suffers. The business then suffers because it can't achieve the services as
Mhm.
outlined in a scope, right? And you
Yeah.
get that domino effect of pushing down at all times. So, yeah, they may get limited success, but is it sustainable?
Mm-hmm.
The answer to that is it's not sustainable. Sooner or later, there will be a chink in the chain will come apart, and all of a sudden they're looking for a new employee to fill that role of a person that had got completely overrun within their job.
Mm-hmm. You can really hear how this takes pressure off teams. Clarity creates confidence, and confidence drives performance. Once actions, as you said, or when you fulfill your task affects your productivity, that certainly can affect the productivity of the whole team. So, Ian, bringing it all together, when organizations get scope and the process right, from values and regulations to people and performance, what long term benefits do you typically see for clients in terms of sustainability, credibility, and overall business excellence?
Well, this comes back again, it comes back to people, and your people must have their primary aim of being high achievers within their role. Because if they're high achievers within their role, that means not only are they delivering the very best for themselves, so ultimately at the end of the day, their desk is clear, their tasks have been completed, they are happy to get in their car, drive home, and have quality time with their family or their loved ones, right? Vice versa for the business knows and shooting this right to the very top. Same applies to the managing director. The managing director can do the same thing. Wow, all my key objectives are now being met. My profit targets are being achieved. Everything's in place. And he knows in his own mind the only reason why that is occurring is because his people are continuing on their accelerating continuous improvement targets and process,
Mm-hmm.
right? High achievers across the board. And we go back to that word simple. And this is what I often make myself chuckle in reference to that word simple. We have
Yeah.
a couple of ads that are running in Australia at the moment in reference to insurance, and it's meerkats are the ones that are featured. And he's standing on a fence and he's sort of rocking backwards and forwards. And he said, "It's really quite simple. It's the performance that you're looking for. Look at the evidence." And the young lady that originally walked past and he's got the page dangling in front of her face, and she looks back and she says, "Wow, I do need to stop and think." And that's what
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying. It is such a simple process. If we stop, people focus at all steps of the process, people focus when we put together our business and the service we offer, which means the scope of your business.
Yeah.
And if we do that, everything will then turn out be
Mm.
successful.
Yeah.
People matter. And that's the
Right.
point I think I continually make, particularly now in the world today. And again, I heard it the other day where people were saying, yeah, but people should be able to use chatbots and AI and things like that. And I said, well, okay, well, that's fine. But at all times, you have to remember a chatbot or a machine, they call it AI, but I always call it algorithms and machines. At all times, you've got to be trying to ensure your brain is kept active at all
Mm-hmm.
times. And if we
I
keep
agree.
our brains active and being challenged at all times, that's where we do get high achievers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how business become ultra successful, right? And they have that ability to take the knock when it comes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we have to be. We have to be bulletproof to be able, particularly in the world today, to take these knocks. Okay.
Yeah.
And we're only going to be able to achieve that if we have an understanding of all our workers are high achievers, all our workers are achieving their key performance targets, our business ourselves, we're achieving all our performance targets. Ultimately, we are achieving sustained success.
Right.
Okay, and that's ultimately where we have this. And going back to what I originally said, where someone challenged me, talking about the scope of the business is oh so mundane and boring. It is not. It is all to do with people focused, high achievers, and businesses demonstrating through the rule of law, through legal and legislative requirements that ultimately they're doing everything to the best of their ability, they're complying through conformance, and they're achieving sustained success.
Hmm. And we really have to take advantage of our ability to critically think, because that can't be done by any machines, I think.
I just think, yeah, totally agree. And it's going
Yeah.
to be a very interesting point in time where we look back and we think to ourselves, okay, so I actually run a business that all it does is run on robots. Okay. Now,
Mhm.
ultimately, there are organisations, take for instance, organisations that make motor cars, right? Now, a lot of these have now gone over to robots, right? But what people need to understand, a robot can only work if someone ultimately has put that program together,
Mhm.
number one. Number two, ultimately, if someone is overseeing how they are actually delivering that service, right?
Mhm.
Because no matter how good a machine is, ultimately it needs to be serviced, it needs to be maintained, and it needs to be checked.
Mhm.
Now, my fear is that ultimately certain people in industry today feel, no, 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 you won't need any human oversight. All that human oversight will be done through what they call artificial intelligence, but it's through algorithms which are put together by people, right?
Mhm.
And then you have to then say, well, okay, who are the people putting those algorithms together? What are their motives if they don't ultimately have oversight to ensure that things are being done correctly?
Correctly. Yeah. And it's just interesting how often the long term wins come from doing the fundamentals properly, not
Yes,
chasing the next big thing. And
yes,
it's pretty clear that scope and process are about the real direction when businesses are clear on what they do, how they do it, why they do it, and most essentially, how people really fit into that picture. Everything else, as you said earlier, starts to align more naturally.
yes,
So, thank you
yes,
so much again, Ian.
yes. And as we said, people focus, people matter.
I agree. Very well said. And I appreciate you breaking this down. And thank you for sharing your time with our audience, Ian, again.
And again, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity for yourself and X-Rays. Deeply honoured, and indeed, I also understand that our guests are deeply honoured as well to be able to have the ability to be part of this process. Thank you so
Mhm.
much, Miles, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.
Same here, Ian. Thank you. So, we're leaving some useful links below for you to check out if you'd like to learn more about ACI Global, their education and certification programs, or how they help organizations build capability through continuous improvement. Thanks everyone for staying with us. And if you think this conversation with Ian helped you think differently about your own business, even just a little, then it was time well spent. See you again in our next episodes. This has been your host, Miles, with Ian, reminding you to stay focused, driven, and inspired with X Raced.